All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. It is my absolute honor to have Mary Jo Hoffman here with us today. I'll just show it. So you can watch on YouTube as well, but we've got beautiful, beautiful book called Still on here, and she's the author of the Still blog, and it's just awesome to have you here with us to chat today about Minnesota and gardening and all the things that go along with that, Mary Jo. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Brad. I'm delighted to be here. I love talking to my neighbors in Minnesota. So this is wonderful. Thank you.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So before we get too far into things, could you give folks like your background and history and how you got into this daily process of taking a still photo each day?
Yeah. So I grew up in Minnesota, grew up in Shoreview where I live now, went to school at undergrad at Madison, Wisconsin, and then graduate school at Stanford and got a degree in aerospace engineering, worked in research at Honeywell Labs, Honeywell Research Center here in Minneapolis for 17 years. Loved it. And then confluence of family planning and corporate takeovers, I left after 17 years and then went heads down with kids. And then one day picked my head up when my youngest went to school and said, oh, I have some free time, and for the first time in 20 years, and I think I want to use it to do some creative, something creative. So, which I had interest in as a kid, but kind of tabled, out of necessity of finding a job and all that kind of stuff. So I decided that I would do one of these popular one-a-day projects, and I was a hobby photographer, and I had been for 20 years, and so I thought I'd use the camera, instead of paints or pens. and then my subject, I looked around, I considered other things. I considered a lot of things, and I thought, what am I doing? I live in 3 acres of woods on a lake. I walk the dog every day. We're a nature family. Why wouldn't nature be my subject? So I combined those three things, a project a day with my camera, found nature, and I came up with this project Still, which I started January 1st, 2012, and here we are 12 and a half years later. It was supposed to be a one-a-day project, and I haven't stopped. So,
yeah, and you just have so many gorgeous, beautiful photos that you have taken, and you've put those together into a new book that just came out in May. So congratulations, huge congratulations on that. It's called Still, The Art of Noticing. And with that book, it's a collection of your photography, but also essays. And I was really unexpectedly surprised, and no offense to you whatsoever, but I was surprised at how much the essays were, to me, as much or more part of the book than the photos themselves. That the photos were secondary to the essays, which were gorgeous and just so well written and resonated with me, like where I'm at in my stage in life and different things like that. So before we get into the essays and those kinds of things, how would you describe your art and your photography that you do? It's beautiful. And how, in an audio format, do you describe what you do?
Yeah, that's a really funny question. Because I've been doing this now for 12 and a half years, a photo a day. So if I'm out, socially and people say, what do you do? My answer for the last 12 years has been, I have a quirky little nature blog. That's it. and then if they expressed any interest, I'd say it's easier to just show you on my phone, and I pull up Instagram and show them my feed, then try to explain it. But I'll try to do it for your listeners because it's very stylized. It's always on a bright white or some, I did one year pure black, but it's either bright white or pure black background. Very stylized. The compositions are very graphic, very modern, and yet they kind of nod towards the old botanical prints. So sort of I would call it maybe pseudoscientific. I use lots of grids, lots of circles. I mean, the engineer in me comes out. If you look at it and I'm an aerospace engineer and then look at my compositions, there's no...
Absolutely.
There's an aha moment, yeah. So anyway, yes, it's a modern aesthetic. It's bright, it's bold and graphic layouts, and either, very ordered or very sensuous. I either lean into the order of the composition or I lean into the organicness of the composition. So anyways, it's hard to explain, but once you see it, it's a very recognizable style because I didn't hire these the still police, but they're out there around the internet, and they're always sending me stuff saying, somebody posted this and didn't credit you. Is this your work? So it's a style that people recognize very quickly as mine.
Yeah, and we as we were going through the book, I had the pleasure. My 13-year-old and I read it together. She kind of skipped the essay portions of it, but we looked through all the pictures together, and we were about halfway through the book, and we have a puzzle that we did that was a really terribly hard puzzle this winter, and I was like, holy cow, is this Mary Jo? And so we went and looked, and it was very similar concept, but not used. So it's that folks are definitely resonating and coming to your style for sure, because you've been doing it for a while here. And so with those, your photographs, you do an incredible job. Like there are some that are, like, as you were saying, that were round and a lot of design, a lot of stylized to that. And I was talking again to my family this weekend about what we should talk about. And my wife suggested talking about sacred geometry with you and Fibonacci spirals and those kinds of things, because a lot of that falls under how you do your work. So is that, in addition to native influence that we have here in Minnesota, is that something you think about when you're doing? Like, how do you decide what you are going to do?
Yeah. So good, really good question. So sacred geometry. So I haven't studied or looked into sacred geometry at all. I love geometry. I love seeing and recognizing and finding patterns in nature. I mean, Fibonacci series is probably my favorite, my favorite mathematical expression ever. It's all over in nature. And if listeners aren't familiar, it's the Nautilus shell, the spiral of the Nautilus shell, which is the spiral of our galaxies, which is the spiral of the universe, which is the spiral of the seeds in a sunflower seed head. I mean, it's everywhere. And when I see it, I'm always thrilled. I mean, yesterday I posted on Instagram a maple seed, a maple samara, and a dragonfly wing, just side by side. It's uncanny, the resemblance. And so, I don't know, maybe I'm just like a pattern maker. I don't know. I love finding pattern and repetition, and I love like highlighting that in my photos. So I come at it probably a little bit more from the scientific side than from the sacred geometry side. However, I've spent 12 years playing with different forms of composition, and I've tried everything, right? And I keep coming back to the circle. Like I've tried ovals, I've tried, egg shapes, I've tried everything. And, among all the other like grids and spills and sprays and all that, spirals. And I keep coming back to the circle. And so it's just because I find it the most pleasing to look at. When I make a composition that's a circle, it's pleasing. And the interesting thing is if you look at the book, I don't do mandalas. Like, I don't know why. They just never interested me. And if you go on Instagram, that, the mandala with the repetition in a circular format, that's everywhere. Like, a lot of people respond to that, and yet my circles are really different. They're circular, but they're not like a radial symmetry, if you will. You know what I mean? Like a mandala.
Right.
So anyway, that is maybe a much longer answer to a simple question of whether I've looked at sacred geometries.
No, that's exactly what I was going for. And as you look at your photos and just the way you put things together as well, and I think this is starting to tie into the gardening and natural landscape world of things, is that you use a lot of found organic objects, and so grasses and twigs and berries and those types of things all through the landscape. But you also use, as folks that are watching, you can see the coyote photo back behind you in the screen here. You also use a lot of dead birds and those types of things. And so it's not just a little quirky on things, but also showing all aspects of life, and not just the pretty things that we quote unquote look at that are beautiful in the world, but also finding beauty in a lot of other things. How do you decide what you want to use that way? And just why does that resonate with you to include things that may not fall into that traditional category of beauty, to have them in your book?
Yeah. When when you're doing a photo a day, part of it is it's like beggars can't be choosers. Whatever you find that catches your eye, honestly, becomes a candidate. One photo a day for 12 and a half years I'm at photo 4,500 something right now. So, it's a lot of subjects. So I don't pass up anything that's interesting. I have two criteria when I pick a subject. It has to be either beautiful or interesting. And if it can be both, then I have a really good day, right? So if I can't, so it has to be beautiful or interesting, but ideally both. And so, yeah, I do a lot of roadkill, and roadkill isn't itself beautiful, and it's very sad, but it's also, the wing of the blue jay is gorgeous. You know what I mean? And, that coyote behind me on the wall that's printed to 50 inches wide he was roadkill on the side of Highway 88 in New Brighton and on the way to piano lessons. And he had been clipped obviously in the middle of the night, and he had this dusting of snow, kind of freezing rain snow, that freezes like crystal sugar, And there wasn't bloody. It wasn't a bloody scene. He'd been clipped in the hindquarters, and I don't know. I ran home, got my camera in that day, and put my white background underneath the head and made some photos. And it's one of my most popular photos. And it looks like, you can't tell he's dead. It looks like he's either sleeping or that I caught him as he moved by quickly. I caught him a glance of the coyote. You can't tell that he's dead, but anyway. So I like to do roadkill. I find beauty in those animals. Unfortunately, the birds that hit the window, the sliding glass door, I find beauty in all of it. I also, though, after 12 years, after 3 or 4 years, you get tired of photographing everything in its peak expression. You know what I mean? Here's the perfect iris. Here's the perfect milkweed pod. Here's the perfect that. After that, after you exhaust all those possibilities, then you start to realize that it's the imperfect that's more interesting, right? It's the dying sunflower. It's the sunflower that's past its prime, who's nodding his head in submission. That's more interesting than the perfect sunflower. So anyway.
And that I was going to head into more landscape things next, but that you reminded me of another question that I have is, let's talk about the dailiness of I would have always termed it as consistency and that kind of thing, but I really like the term dailiness that you use in the book on things. And with that, I always, not to make the podcast all about me, but I always work better under constraints and this is the goal and these are deadlines, these are constraints in order to get things done. And dailiness is something that I have never been able to attain, basically. And so how do you do that? How do you stay committed to doing something every single day like this that's a creative outlet, and what sort of constraints does that put on you and your family and your life and that kind of thing as to how you actually just get that done?
Yeah. I'm not a particularly disciplined person. I'm not.
All evidence to the contrary.
Well, people say that all the time. And if you knew me, I'm not. If I was super disciplined, I'd lose weight. Let's be clear. So what I did though, I do give whole lectures on just dayless. I do think the creative process is an on-ramp to the sacred. And I found one route onto that on-ramp through dailiness. So it's the closest I probably get to religious. I just happen to, and some people call it intuitive wisdom. I stumbled into a practice. I defined the practice, whether it was through wisdom or luck, that became more life-affirming and life-enhancing than it took to do it, right? So it became this positive. I didn't have to carve out time to do it. and I didn't have to make myself do it. And so it became something I look forward to doing because I got so much back from it. And so that was lucky. But then, after 12 and a half years, the power of dailiness is profound. It's so profound. And what in the power of dailiness, what you're committing to is the process of not breaking the chain. And then you're not concerned at all about the results. You don't even think about the results. Like you're not, I don't start every day thinking, oh, I have to make art today. I just start my day thinking, I can't break the chain today. And then the art makes itself by not breaking the chain, if that makes sense. And it takes all the pressure of performance, all the pressure of perfectionism, all of that off, because all you're committing to and all you have to do to be successful is not break the chain. And it's super powerful way to side skirt a lot of the mind talk that shuts people down, like, oh, this isn't good enough, or I can't photograph that's stupid, It sidesteps all of that because what you've committed to is not breaking the chain. So it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. I happen to craft it in a way where I was one of those kids that ran wild in the woods as a kid. And so the fact that I went back to found nature after 20 years of corporate work, like that was, I guess I'll give myself some credit and say that was some intuitive wisdom. I mean, that's part of the reason it stuck and it stayed. So anyways, the whole practice of dailiness, I could go on and on about how powerful it is. It's tremendously powerful. Beyond, I didn't know this when I started, but now I'm like an evangelist. So
I love it.
It works.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. Yeah. And
And
it's a little different than a habit because, you do daily, you brush your teeth every day. You do a daily practice.
Right.
Period. So, right, you do it. But what this is it's a little different than a habit, which is brushing your teeth. This is more what I would call a daily ritual, which is just a habit wrapped in meaning. And so there's just a nuanced difference. But anyway, you can do it because you do it. You brush your teeth every day. Yeah.
So what is that specifically? What is that meaning for you, Mary Jo? Like, what is that the meaning around that habit for you and what people get? And I guess this leads. And is this for you, or is it for people who are experiencing your art? Like, what is the meaning that's around that habit?
Yeah, I wish I wish I could be like, speaking publicly here with you and it's going to get shared. I wish I could sound really altruistic and say, oh yeah, it's for my viewers, or even to say, oh yeah, I want to share my enthusiasm for the natural world. But the truth is, I make the art for myself. The process,
Which is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I do it for myself. I share it because I think that's a part of the process. And if people also like it, then that's great. But I make it for two reasons, three. One, I had a creative side I wanted to express. But two is when I'm in the process of making and even in the process of finding, foraging, I can get myself into that creative state of flow that everybody talks about that's a really wonderful place to spend time every day. Like it's cool to get lost, to lose your ego, to lose self, and then wake up, come out of it 20, 40, 60 minutes later and not even realize time had gone by. So, creativity for me, doing this daily practice puts me in that state of flow, which is essentially like a meditation. And then, when I look through the viewfinder and hit the shutter, I get a thrill if I know that I've just made something really good. Not every day is artful. When you do 4,500 images, you're just not breaking the chain. But every now and then I look through that viewfinder and I get that swelling feeling of, oh my God, that is so gorgeous. And, that's still exciting to me. So I do it for those reasons, and then I share it.
Beautiful. And that's why I garden. Like I do this for me. Like I do this not for altruistic reasons, or there are things that I believe and I feel, but it's for me to make sure to be getting that piece out of it and having not only beautiful things, but also supporting our world around us and making sure that we are helping to do that, because that brings me joy and that gets me where I want to be. And so it's a beautiful thing there. So I don't think, well, again, I don't need to make it about me. So I will continue.
I think you tapped onto something, because, the fact that I'm still doing this 12 and a half years later is because it's coming from within me. If I had started a daily practice, and said, I'm going to commit to this for 1 year, but it was to satisfy someone out there or to present myself a certain way in the world, or, you know what I mean? That project probably wouldn't have lasted beyond 1 year. But because it's coming from deep inside myself, and that's why 12 and a half years later, I'm still doing it, and I don't intend to stop. And then, you don't ever intend to not be a gardener. Like, right? You're not going to stop being a gardener someday. It's just part of who you are. Yeah.
Right. And it gives me, like I said, it gives me joy. And it a lot like your book has given me joy. And so I just want to show here. Usually I take and make a variety of bullet points. There's different things that I want to talk about with the book. And so we were able to talk for a little bit before we started recording. But I have one exact mark on here today because I wanted to... I find your essays fascinating, and they really resonate with where I'm at in my point in life. But one of the things that specifically related to gardening and the world outside that I found was the concept of 6 seasons and 72 micro seasons, and working together in that direction. And so that's what I'd like to spend the last 10 minutes or so here on this episode talking about, is that the mindfulness and the ability to see those small things throughout our seasons, especially here in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, where we have so much, we're blessed with having so much change throughout the seasons and having that piece. And so can we first talk about 72 seasons and then micro seasons and then 6 seasons and unlocking that piece there. So will you explain first the 72 micro seasons? And I want to say one real quick thing here first is that it was a beautiful surprise as we were going through your book and read about 72 micro seasons, and then got to that page where you can open up and see the whole thing. And it was just, and that's when my daughter first started reading it with me, because I was like, look how cool this is, that there's this whole page that opens up, and it was just unexpected. And it was really, really well done. So to you and your publishers, that was a brilliant little surprise in there. So 72 micro seasons, give it to us.
Yeah. So 72 micro seasons is an ancient Japanese calendar of 5-day increments, and the Japanese lived by it 1,200 years ago. I think they lived by it for about 500 years. It was the Heian period of the Japanese culture, which would be like our Italian Renaissance, high culture, high art, and you were considered, highly cultured or whatever, well educated if you lived by the 72 micro seasons. And so everybody did live by this. And if you like Japanese food and you know what kaiseki is 72 micro seasons.
All right.
So yeah. So it still lives on today, and it's actually having a comeback, the idea of 72 micro seasons. So it was based on 5-day increments of the unfolding of the Japanese calendar. And the interesting thing about us in Minnesota here is that we're at the 45th parallel latitude, and so is Japan. I mean, Japan's a long island, but the 45th parallel also passes through Japan. So if you read this Japanese calendar and you read my calendar, first of all, if you read just the Japanese like I did, stumble on the Japanese calendar and you read it, it's like, oh goodness, that's so similar to what happens here, in Minnesota. It's the same. Their spring arrives earlier. It arrives in February, but otherwise the seasons unfold very, very similarly. And so that got me excited. But what happened is because of the challenge, and it really is a challenge to find a subject every single day to photograph. Like, I don't know what I'm going to photograph today. You and I, Brad, are talking at 9:30 in the morning, and I have no idea yet what I'm going to photograph today. So every day, is a challenge. And so what happened is, by being that attentive to have to find a new subject every day to photograph, made me come to an understanding that when I see something, I often had like 3, 4, 5 days before it disappeared, or was so weather, rain beaten or wind beaten that it didn't look photogenic anymore. And so I was putting this whole mental map together in my head, and of like, okay, when this, when the pussy willow goes, then the maples, and then, as soon as I see the snow circles in March, I know that the crocuses will be coming, and then, then the willow branches will turn deep yellow. And so I was putting together this whole mental map in my head of how, so that I could anticipate what subjects I had to photograph. And then lo and behold, out of nowhere, I find this Japanese calendar. So it's thrilling. If you read the Japanese one, it's gorgeous. It reads like haiku. They had 500 years to tweak it and perfect it. I had like, 3 months before I turned in my manuscript to the editor, but I tried my best to do a haiku-like beautiful unfolding of our seasonal calendar. So, the thing is, it's in there, you talk that fold out, it's called a gatefold. I didn't know that. You work with a publisher and you learn these terms.
Wonderful.
There's a gatefold that is this, I have this all 72 microseasons of our bioregion, which I call the Great Lakes North, which, is from Minnesota to Maine, the northern eastern hardwood forest. So it applies to anyone in that bioregion. And I would love people to take a look and tell me, get a conversation started. This is 12 years of observation, documented through photographs. And then for each microseason, I picked 2 images to illustrate that microseason. And yeah, based on in recognition or in commemoration of the Japanese calendar. And I think it turned out really beautiful. I'm super proud of it. It was a tremendous amount of work. But the one thing I didn't have time to do is like cross-check it with a bunch of like naturalist experts in the area, just because the publishing deadlines. But I would still love to do that. Like who's the naturalist up in Duluth that has a radio show? Larry.
Oh.
Yeah, I follow him. Anyways,
Larry. Yeah.
I would have loved him to give it. I would have loved Alan Burgo, our local foraging chef that is expert on that. I would have loved some of these experts to cross-check my work, but it's there. It's in print. Let's have a discussion. Yeah.
Well, so I have a question about that. Is that as we talk about your work and your body of work that you've got, is those 72 microseasons, as you've looked into that and researched that, are those 72 microseasons for you in Shoreview or for us in the Twin Cities? Is that different for me in Shakopee? Is that different for my mom in Northwest Iowa? Like, how do you, the geography of things, how does that, because Duluth is obviously dramatically different than where we are. So how does that, when you get into such a small increment of time, which is a beautiful thing, like how did the Japanese and how did other cultures handle that type of microseason thought?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So first of all, this is a seasonal calendar, not an astronomical calendar. So our current calendar that we all live by is astronomical. It's based on, the Earth around the sun and then the moon around the Earth. This is a seasonal unfolding. So, one thing, the snow melts, and then because of the meltwater, then the bulbs push up and the worms start to move. And then, so one thing begets another. So it's a seasonal unfolding. This is what I would say, because for sure, the thing about Japan is that it's a maritime climate, and that large body of the Pacific Ocean tends to dampen or mediate their weather, the uncertainty of their weather, right? Whereas we're landlocked in the middle of the North American continent. We have probably some of the most variable weather on the planet, and because there's no big, large bodies of water to help offset the extreme temperatures. And so what happens, what I've noticed, what I've observed is the seasons always unfold. It's like pushing dominoes. They will always unfold in almost the same pattern every year. Some years, if we have a really late spring, those microseasons might pile on each other, right? So but normally you tip one and then they all just start to fall in the same order every year. But what is variable about here is sometimes that starts in March, sometimes usually it starts in April. I say spring, it's just starting with spring. And on really bad years, it starts in early May. So our start of spring is variable. It has about, I say, a 3-week variability, but once it starts, it will unfold in the same direction every year. And I think that's true of our bioregion, which is the Great Lakes North. So yes, I think, Wisconsin, Michigan, Northern Ohio, all Ontario, all of us, even Northern New York, all the same bioregion. Your mom in Iowa is a different bioregion, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's in a different bioregion. So it's not quite the same for her. And
Yeah. And all that, it totally make, as we think about, like landscape and gardening for, let's say the chickadees that need tens of thousands of caterpillars in order to, have a, single brood of baby chickadees and that kind of thing. So as we think about those black-capped chickadees, and they can't do that until the caterpillars all start to appear. And so, and once we start to get those caterpillars, then they can. So that's that domino effect as it goes
yeah,
through
it
there, and
is.
the
It's
mosquitoes showing
absolutely
up.
a
And
domino. Yeah. The minute the mosquitoes hatch, literally within days, all the fly catching birds will be in the backyard, all of them, and the bats will come out, but not until the mosquitoes hatch. So it's like one thing has to happen before the next, and once you start to see that, it's just a fun way to live, right? It's things aren't chaotic and random; they're ordered and they have meaning and purpose. Yeah.
right, we have a thing in our family where we every year when we see the first robin that has come up, we stamp, and it's just a weird, quirky little thing that my mom's family has always done. And so you take and you lick your thumb, and then you press it into your palm, and that's when you see the first robin. And so we all do that, and we post it on Facebook. And so now we have a whole collection of weirdos that are stamping when we see our first robin, and that's always an important
I love that so
beginning
much. I love that.
of the seasons and where we're getting to. And you talk, the other thing I wanted to get into with your book is you talk about, and I'm so sorry, we're taking you way over time here
I'm fine.
today
I'm
with
actually fine.
conversation,
We
but,
can talk all day. I love this subject.
but six seasons, and that sort of, I don't know, broke or fixed something in my brain, however you want to call it, was just the concept of 6 seasons instead of our traditional spring, summer, fall, winter. Can you introduce that concept to everyone and how those seasons flow, and why, for a climate like ours in the upper Midwest here and in our why that's critically important?
Right. So yeah, I talk about it in one of the essays, and quite frankly, 72 microseasons caught my attention, and it's fascinating, and I'm proud of the work. But 6 seasons is much easier for the ordinary person to remember, and of course, like you, when I read it the first time, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense for us. So I stumbled across it because Kurt Vonnegut had given like a commencement address at a college in upstate New York, and he was challenging the kids to think, out of the ordinary, out of the box, to question conventionality. And one of the examples he gave is, what if there weren't 4 seasons? 4 seasons doesn't make sense for us in a northern climate. And then he went and he suggested that maybe there are 6 seasons. And the 6 seasons are, do you have it, Brad, handy? It's, instead of the 4, spring, summer, winter, fall, it adds 2 seasons. One is unlocking, which is March and April. No, and then locking up, which is November, December. Yeah, that's how it goes.
Right.
So it starts with unlocking, because he says, and this is where you have that aha light bulb moment. March is not spring in Minnesota. It's the astronomical calendar says March 1st is spring, and the meteorological calendar, or the astronomical, says March 21st, the vernal equinox. The meteorological calendar says it's March 1st. And, if you're a resident of Minnesota, March is not spring. It's not spring. So when
Right.
you see on this 6-season calendar and they say, no, let's add 2 seasons, unlocking and locking. So unlocking is when we're in thaw, right? And so, suddenly you go, oh my gosh, March and April are unlocking. And then, which that's May, and then May and June become spring, July and August become summer. They're hot, it feels like summer. September, October becomes autumn, And then November, December becomes locking up, which in Minnesota makes total sense, which is when the lakes freeze, right? When the ponds freeze, when we have first frost, when the ponds freeze, when the lakes freeze, when we have that first snow that then lasts till spring. That all happens in, by late December. And then January, February being winter, true winter. And that correlates with our coldest weeks of the year here in Minnesota. So the sixth season makes a ton of sense. And I attributed it to Kurt Vonnegut for a long time until I was doing research for this essay on 72 microseasons. And then I realized the Cree Indians had lived by this 6-season calendar forever. And so they knew that's the calendar that made the most sense to them and their northern indigenous tribe. So we're maybe, Kurt Vonnegut and I just reinvented what the already knew for thousands of years. So
as we do with so many things,
as we are doing all the time right now, right? Yes. Yeah.
Right. Ancient wisdom is a good thing. And it is funny how so many of these things, like as we were talking earlier as well about moon cycles and how there's a lot of indigenous wisdom around moon cycles and seasons that way, and just what can happen when those things are part of us. And it's just a really beautiful thing to look at and to learn about and to go from there. But Mary Jo Hoffman, thank you so much for sharing and for your book, which is wonderful. And we'll have links to that in the show notes that everybody can get if they go to minnesotagardening.com, and the link there, it will be easy to find for everyone. Is there anything, Mary Jo, that I haven't asked you about that you wanted to make sure to share with folks today?
I think this was wonderful. I love this discussion. I really do. No, you've done a good job. I can't think of anything. It's perfect. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I enjoy nature. And it does make life in Minnesota so much easier if you don't think of March as spring, but call it unlocking. And then suddenly it becomes a lot more tolerable.
Exactly. And anything, to talk about my mom again, she calls it mud season. So we're farm folks, and March is mud. So that's where we're at. So perfect. Well, thank you so much again, Mary Jo. You can find Mary Jo Hoffman on Instagram. You can see all of her beautiful photography there, the stillblog.net. Is that correct? Stillblog.net? Yep. And then the book, The Art of Noticing, is available anywhere you buy books and is in its second publishing already. So congratulations again to you on such a phenomenal achievement there. So it just came out this spring, and we'll go from there. So thanks again, Mary Jo, for being here, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Brad. It's been a delight. Thanks.